I thought repairing deep-sea cables would just mean cold dives, heavy suits, and long hours underwater. I was wrong. On my very first shift, I learned there were 11 rules carved into a rusted metal plate, bolted to the inside of the submersible bay. They weren't company policies. They were survival warnings. Some of them made sense, most didn't. But the crew swore by every single one. I remember the first time I broke one. The ocean went silent, like it was holding its breath, and I realized something was waiting in the dark. I survived that night, but only because I hadn't broken the next rule yet. On that first dive, I caught myself staring at the strange plate in the submersible bay, where the rules were etched, and the first line read Rule 1, never dive without checking the lights twice. It sounded almost silly when I said it in my head, like advice for someone who didn't know how to follow a checklist. Still, the way the crew looked at it, silent, serious, almost fearful, made me uneasy. They weren't reciting a safety guideline. They were reminding themselves of something they'd seen before, something I hadn't yet. The descent started rougher than I expected. The winch rattled above us, and the dive bell swayed slightly with each groan of the ship. Inside, the air felt stale, heavy with grease and seawater. I switched on my helmet lamp, watching the beam flare against the steel walls, then flickered the interior bulb once more for good measure. The others did the same, though one of the older men pressed his switch a second time, checking it like a ritual. His hand shook as he pulled it away, and that simple gesture told me more than any explanation could. The trench below was a gaping wound in the earth, swallowing our lights as though the sea itself wanted to keep us blind. We unlatched the hatch, water rushing against the edges, and stepped onto the seafloor. My boots sank slightly into the silt, and the cable stretched ahead like a pale scar in the dark. The job was straightforward: tighten the clamps, replace the shielding, patch the insulation, but it was hard to focus with the black pressing in on all sides. Every so often, I thought I saw faint glimmers out there, pinpricks of light far from our reach, and I kept telling myself it was just my eyes adjusting. Half an hour in, one of the rookies swore over the radio. His lamp had gone out. The others froze, their silence speaking louder than any curse. He admitted he'd only checked it once before we left the bay, following standard procedure but not the etched command. I felt my stomach knot as he fumbled with his switch, his breathing ragged inside the helmet. For a second the beam sparked to life again, but then it died, leaving him cloaked in shadow. He shouted at us to help, his words breaking into static that didn't sound entirely human anymore. That was when I saw them. At the very edge of my visor's glow, shapes shimmered in the water, lights, faint and pale, drifting closer. At first I thought it was another diver's lamp, but the movement was wrong, slow and swaying, like something drifting on unseen currents. One shimmer became 2, then 3, each one hovering just beyond reach. They pulsed faintly, almost as if mimicking our lamps. My chest tightened as I realized they were circling the rookie, surrounding him in silence. His voice kept cracking through the static, calling for help, but none of us moved. The veteran broke the silence, with a whisper so soft it barely carried through the comms. "Don't follow him." His words chilled me, not just because of what he said, but because of the way his voice trembled. The rookie stumbled forward into the dark, his arms outstretched, chasing the false lights as if they were rescue. His outline grew fainter with every step, swallowed by the shimmering glow until he vanished completely. No splash, no scream, just gone, like the sea had taken him without resistance. We finished the work in silence, every movement mechanical, hands stiff inside thick gloves. My mind screamed at me to ask questions, to demand answers, but fear locked my throat shut. The shimmering lights lingered at the edge of vision, never approaching, never leaving, as though they were waiting to see if another of us would break. When the hatch shut behind us and the bell began to rise, the relief I felt was sharp enough to hurt, but it didn't last long. Halfway up, I thought I saw one of the shimmers outside the small porthole, rising with us, floating steadily in the dark. Back on the surface, the air felt different, thin and stale. I ripped my helmet off, my lungs burning as though I had been holding my breath for hours. The veteran climbed out after me, eyes unfocused, his hands trembling. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You checked the lights twice, didn't you?" I nodded, my throat dry, and he muttered, "Good, that's the only reason you're here." He walked away without another word, leaving me on the deck with the sound of the waves slamming against steel. That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't shake the image of the rookie vanishing into the false glow. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the shimmers swaying at the edges of my vision, patient and steady. I told myself they couldn't follow me up here, but when the cabin light above my head flickered once, just once, I felt my blood run cold. I reached up and switched it off entirely, staring into the dark, and prayed the sea would forget me for now. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. The next morning, my head still buzzed with the memory of the flickering light in my cabin, and I couldn't shake the words etched into the plate. The second line read, "Rule 2. Never open the hatch if you hear knocking from outside." At first, it sounded like nonsense. We were hundreds of meters under the sea. Who would be knocking? But the tone of the crew told me it wasn't a joke. No one laughed about the rules. No one ever did. The weather was rough, steel groaning under the push of waves as we prepared for another descent. The crew avoided my eyes, as though speaking to me might jinx them. I noticed the roster again, pinned to the board, but my attention was on the rules bolted just beneath it. I thought of the rookie who hadn't checked his lights twice, and the silence that followed him. My gut twisted when I imagined what kind of thing would need a hatch to get inside. The bell lowered us into the dark, chains rattling as the sea closed over the steel walls. I sat across from the veteran again. His visor fogged slightly from his breath, and I realized he was gripping the seat frame with white knuckles. The descent felt longer than usual, each meter pulling us deeper into something that didn't want us there. When the hatch released, the water pressed against us like a living thing, heavy and waiting. We stepped out, boots sinking into the silt, lights trembling against the endless black. The work that night was routine. Splice, secure, and rebolt. My mind should have been focused on the cable, but all I could think of was the faint static in my radio. Every few minutes, I thought I heard a whisper, soft and broken, like someone mumbling my name. I told myself it was interference, nothing more, but the veteran glanced at me once, his expression grim. It was as if he knew what I'd heard, and he didn't want me to speak it aloud. Hours later, when we finally sealed the hatch behind us and began the long rise, I felt the relief spread through my chest. That was when it started. A sound against the outer shell, dull, steady, rhythmic. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, deliberate. I froze, my hand inches from my harness, every hair on my neck standing up. It wasn't the groan of metal or the shift of currents. It was someone or something asking to be let in. The veteran's voice cracked over the radio. "Don't move." His tone wasn't commanding, it was pleading. My lungs burned as I held my breath, and the knocks came again, louder this time, followed by silence so deep I could hear the blood in my ears. My mind fought to make sense of it. We were too deep for another diver, too far for a submarine to be beside us. Yet the sound was unmistakable, the kind of rhythm that came from knuckles on steel. Minutes stretched endlessly as the bell crept upward. The sound returned, closer now, resonating through the chamber floor. I gripped the bench so tightly my fingers ached, and in the dim light, I thought I saw the outline of a shadow pass across the porthole. No form, no face, just the distortion of something pressed against the glass. My stomach turned to ice as I realized it was keeping pace with us, rising as we rose. When the final lurch of the winch told us we had breached the surface, the knocks stopped. No fading, no echo, just gone. The hatch opened from above, surface crew hauling us out, their faces calm and unaware. They hadn't heard a thing. As I pulled myself onto the deck, my legs shaking, I caught the veteran staring at the water with hollow eyes. His lips moved silently, as if reciting the rule under his breath. That night, the sound followed me. I lay awake in my cabin, staring at the door, and every creak of the ship made me flinch. Around midnight, it came again, not from the sea this time, but from just outside my room. 3 knocks, slow and measured, rattled through the wood. My heart slammed in my chest, and I stared at the handle, gleaming faintly in the dark. My mind screamed that it was one of the crew, a prank, anything but what it really was. But deep down, I knew the rhythm. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking came again, longer this time, dragging across the door like a fist sliding against metal. My throat tightened, and sweat stung my eyes as I gripped the sheets with trembling hands. After what felt like hours, it stopped. Silence swallowed the room, so thick I could hear the tremor in my own pulse. I wanted to scream, to pound on the walls and demand answers, but I stayed frozen until morning light crept through the porthole. When I finally left the room, the veteran was waiting in the corridor. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but when he looked at me, I knew he understood. "It follows you back," he said softly. "Doesn't matter where you are." He didn't explain further, didn't need to. The way his voice cracked on those words told me everything. Whatever knocked on that hatch didn't stay in the water. That evening, when the roster was checked and the bell prepared, I felt the weight of the rule heavier than ever. It wasn't just about the sea anymore. It was about the walls, the doors, the barriers between here and there. Every surface could be knocked on. Every handle could be turned. I followed the others into the chamber, my chest tight, and told myself that as long as I remembered the rules, I'd survive. But when we descended again, halfway to the trench floor, the sound came once more. This time, it wasn't on the outside of the bell. It was inside my headset, soft and patient, 3 hollow knocks echoing directly in my ears. The first time I read Rule 3, never answer a voice that uses your name, I thought it was just superstition dressed up like protocol. But when those 3 knocks echoed through my headset, followed by a breathless whisper of my name, the words on that rusted plate burned into my mind. I clenched my jaw, frozen, every instinct screaming to respond, to confirm that I wasn't hearing things. But the veteran across from me must have seen my panic. He shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly, warning me not to give in. The whisper came again, this time clearer. "Evan." It stretched, distorted, as though someone were speaking through a mile of water. My stomach twisted when I realized it wasn't just my name. It was my mother's voice. She'd passed away years ago, but the way she said it, that same tone she used when she'd wake me for school, was exact, perfect. The kind of detail no radio distortion could invent. I locked my eyes on the floor of the chamber, forcing myself to breathe slowly. The other divers were focused on their gear, silent, as though they couldn't hear what I did. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe this thing, whatever it was, singled me out. My hands shook as I reached for the cable spool, pretending to busy myself, though the voice followed, soft and coaxing. "Evan, answer me. You're in danger. I can help." When the hatch released and the water swallowed us, the sound didn't fade. Instead, it deepened, echoing through the black around us, bouncing inside my skull like the sea itself was speaking. Every word hit with a pressure that made my bones ache. I wanted to scream, to rip the headset from my helmet, but my training kept me still. The veteran's earlier warning haunted me. "Don't move, don't speak." We worked in silence, securing the cable under the dim glow of our lights. The seabed stretched endlessly in every direction, shadows shifting where nothing should move. I focused on my bolts, but the voice wouldn't let me go. "Evan, look to your left." Against my better judgment, my head twitched in that direction, and my beam caught something pale, half buried in the sand. A shape like a hand, skeletal fingers twitching ever so slightly before sinking back into the silt. My breath stuttered, fogging the inside of my mask. The whisper grew urgent. Yes, yes, you see me. Help me. Dig me out. I forced myself to look away, screwing the bolt tighter, but I could feel the pull of the thing, its invisible grip tugging at my thoughts. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood just to stop myself from answering. The iron tang grounded me, but the voice only grew sweeter. By the time we ascended, my nerves were frayed raw. The knocks hadn't come, not once, but the whisper of my name clung to me like a shadow. When the bell cracked open at the surface, fresh air never felt so heavy. I staggered back to my cabin, ripped off my suit, and collapsed onto the bunk. Sleep came fast, but not deep. I dreamed of corridors filled with water, doors warping under unseen fists, and my mother's voice calling from the other side. I woke with tears on my face, and a pounding at my door. My blood froze. 3 knocks, deliberate, followed by that same soft voice. Evan, it's me. Please let me in. My chest heaved as I stared at the handle, gleaming faintly in the dark. It was my mother's voice again, but wrong, too calm, too rehearsed, like an echo of a memory I didn't own. I pressed my palms to my ears, rocking in silence, praying it would go away. The knocking stopped after what felt like hours, but the voice didn't. It slipped through the walls, through the vents, curling into my room like smoke. Evan, you don't have to be afraid. You're already mine. My throat burned with the urge to shout back, to curse it, but I swallowed the words, burying my face in my hands until the sun rose. At breakfast, the veteran sat across from me, his tray untouched. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. Without a word, he leaned forward and said, "It knows your name now. Don't let it hear your voice." I wanted to demand answers, to scream at him for keeping me in the dark, but I couldn't. The way his hands shook as he clutched his mug told me I didn't want the full truth. Not yet. The next dive was worse. As we descended, the voice came louder, no longer distorted, no longer distant. It was inside my helmet, whispering directly into my ear. "Evan, why won't you talk to me? You're making this harder." I clenched my fists, every nerve begging to respond, to scream just to drown it out, but I held my tongue. The others moved methodically, blind to the storm in my head, their beams cutting through the murk while mine quivered. Halfway through the shift, the voice changed. It wasn't my mother anymore. It was the veteran's voice, identical in tone and rhythm, echoing phrases I'd heard him use earlier that day. "Check the bolts twice. Don't rush." My skin crawled as I realized it could mimic anything, anyone. The thought of hearing my own voice next made my stomach lurch. We finished the work and began our ascent. That was when the whisper sharpened, crueler, impatient. "If you won't answer me, I'll find someone who will." The headset went dead silent. My chest loosened for a brief moment, until one of the rookies glanced at me with wide, terrified eyes. His radio crackled, faint but clear. "Hello?" he said. I wanted to rip the mic from his helmet, but it was too late. The line filled with static, then laughter. Not human laughter, something guttural, bubbling, as if the ocean itself were trying to imitate joy. The rookie's scream cut through the channel before the line went silent. By the time we reached the surface, his harness was empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The rules weren't just warnings, they were lifelines, and one of us had already severed his. I sat in the dark, the laminated list clutched in my trembling hands, replaying the last sound I'd heard before the rookie vanished. It wasn't laughter, it was my own voice, whispering his name. I read Rule 4, never touch an object that shines in the deep, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. After everything that had happened, I knew the rules weren't arbitrary. They were warnings etched into the fabric of the ocean itself. The disappearance of the rookie and the voices in my headset were proof enough. Now, as we prepared for another descent, I couldn't stop thinking about the things lurking below, hiding just beyond the light of our lamps, waiting for someone stupid enough to reach out. The dive started quietly, almost eerily so. The sea around us was calm on the surface, but as we sank deeper, it turned cold, oppressive, and silent. Our beams cut narrow paths through the black, illuminating the cable sprawled across the silt. The veteran kept checking the lights, but I couldn't help scanning the edges of our glow, scanning for glimmers, for anything that shimmered like a lure. My heart raced at the thought of objects we weren't supposed to touch, glowing faintly in the trench. Minutes into the repair, a faint flicker appeared beyond the cable. I froze, my pulse hammered in my ears as I realized it wasn't a reflection of our lights. It was a faint, steady glow, hovering just above the seabed. I swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to reach toward it. The veteran noticed my hesitation and muttered, "Don't even look directly at it." His words made no sense at first, but I understood instantly. Some things were alive only to the gaze of the foolish. I focused on the cable, but the glow persisted, weaving slowly in the shadows, just beyond reach. Every time my beam passed near it, it pulsed, beckoning. My hands trembled around the tools, and I had to remind myself why Rule 4 existed. The ocean wasn't just water, it was alive with things older than the cables, older than the ship above us. The glow wasn't harmless. It was a trap, and every instinct screamed that one touch, one mistake, could erase me from the world above forever. The veteran moved closer, his gloves brushing against mine, steadying me. "Ignore it," he whispered. "No matter what it looks like." The words were tight in his throat, carrying urgency and fear I hadn't seen before. I wanted to argue, wanted to say I could reach and secure the cable faster if I just tapped the glowing object, but I stopped myself. Every fiber in my body screamed to move toward the light, and I had to forcefully turn my attention back to the work at hand. Suddenly, the shimmer darted faster, closer to the cable. It pulsed in vibrant flashes, like a heartbeat, and I had to remind myself to breathe. It wasn't stationary. It moved, teasing us, taunting the crew. My stomach churned with a mixture of fear and fascination. I knew from the stories whispered among veterans that those who reached for these lights didn't come back. The glow wasn't treasure, wasn't technology. It was a predator, patient, feeding on curiosity. I tried to keep the beam focused on the task, but the shimmer seemed to follow me wherever I turned. Every movement I made it pulse more brightly, more deliberately. I realized then that it wasn't just the act of touching that mattered, it was the act of noticing. Even the smallest acknowledgement could draw attention. The veteran noticed my gaze flicker and slapped my shoulder lightly. "Eyes down," he said. "Focus on the cable. It's the only way we survive." Time blurred as we worked. The glow hovered near the cable, swaying gently, as though it were alive. Every now and then I thought I saw shapes forming in the light. Hands, faces, shadows that weren't human. My mind screamed for rationality, but the instinctive fear rooted me to the spot. I realized I'd never known what it was like to feel truly hunted until now. My every move observed by something beneath the waves that understood me in a way no human could. Then the veteran froze. His beam flickered over a mound of silt nearby, and I saw the glow surge brighter. "Don't touch it," he hissed, more urgently than before. I could feel the pulse of the light through the water, vibrating in the muscles of my arms and legs. It was impossible, unnatural, alive. One of the newer divers, curious, reached toward it for just a second, and the shimmer darted like a living thing, coiling around the diver's suit before vanishing. He screamed into the radio as the static swallowed his words. The bell shook slightly, and then he was gone. I stumbled backward instinctively, clinging to the cable. The veteran grabbed me, holding me steady, whispering, "You saw it, didn't you? That's why the rule exists. Never ever touch it." My hands shook uncontrollably. I couldn't speak. The glow pulsed one last time, before sinking slowly into the darkness, leaving nothing but cold black water. Silence settled around us like a weight, pressing on our chests. The rest of the dive passed in tense, careful silence. We repaired the cable, sealed the connections, and didn't glance at anything else. Not once did I allow my light to stray toward that shimmer again, though I could feel it somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting. By the time the bell began to ascend, my mind was numb, exhausted from fear, but thankful I had survived. The veteran didn't speak much, only offering tight-lipped glances, his eyes reflecting a warning I couldn't forget. Back on the surface, as we climbed out of the bell, I felt the weight of the ocean lift, but the memory of the glow stayed with me. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my cabin seemed to twitch. Every reflection in the porthole seemed alive. I replayed the dive over and over, thinking about how close curiosity had come to killing me. The rules weren't there to protect us from routine mistakes. They existed to protect us from things that were older, stranger, and far more patient than any human imagination could comprehend. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized something else. The shimmer hadn't disappeared. It followed us, in the depths, in the darkness of my mind, in the small pauses between my breath. It existed to test patience, to see who would break the rule first. I didn't know if I would ever truly be safe, but I understood now why the rules weren't suggestions. One wrong move, one spark of curiosity, and you didn't just vanish, you became part of the deep. And somewhere far below, I could swear I saw a faint pulse of light, just at the edge of vision, like it had been waiting for me all along. The glow hadn't disappeared. It lingered at the edge of my vision, even as we climbed back onto the bell. A faint pulse in the darkness below that felt almost alive. That's when I remembered the next rule. Rule 5, never work after dark. I had always assumed it was a safety precaution, a simple guideline for human fatigue and underwater hazards. But after tonight, I knew it was something far worse. Darkness wasn't just the absence of light here. It was a portal, a place where the ocean's patience could twist into something hungry. We were supposed to be finished for the day, but a miscommunication from the surface team meant we had to run a quick diagnostic on the new cable. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the deck bathed in gray twilight. Even the veteran looked uneasy, as he motioned for us to prepare. I tightened my harness, my eyes flicking to the dark horizon over the open sea. Every wave seemed to glare at us like a warning. Every shadow in the bell pressed closer than it should. Descending felt heavier than usual. The winch creaked under the strain, and the darkness outside swallowed the bell as we sank. My hands gripped the rails instinctively, my knuckles white. The other divers were quiet, methodical, but the tension in their shoulders mirrored my own. The glow from Rule 4 haunted me, a memory I couldn't shake. It had followed us before, and I was certain it could follow us now, in the thick black that swallowed everything beyond our lamps. Once we hit the cable, the silence became suffocating. Even the silt on the seabed seemed unnaturally still, as though holding its breath. I tried to focus on the inspection, running my gloved fingers along the sheathing, listening for anything unusual, but in the corner of my vision, the faintest shimmer flickered. Not bright, not as bold as before, but enough to make my heart skip. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself of Rule 5. Working after dark was forbidden for a reason. The veteran broke the silence with a whisper. "Stay close, don't stray from the cable." His words weren't just advice. They were warnings soaked in experience, soaked in fear. I glanced at the other divers, each of them bathed in the pale circle of their lights, yet none dared look around. Every movement was careful, precise, as if the ocean itself was watching. I realized then that this wasn't about avoiding accidents. It was about avoiding something that could reach out and claim you in the black. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I lost track. Time felt distorted down here. That shimmer pulsed again, just beyond the light, coiling and twisting like it wanted to draw me in. My hands shook slightly as I tightened the bolts, every instinct screaming to stop, to retreat, to escape. I had broken the first rule once, just once, and seen the consequences. I couldn't afford to break this one. Darkness was patient, and patience here meant waiting for you to make a fatal mistake. A low current stirred the silt around the cable. The shimmer moved with it, almost imperceptibly. But I saw it, a glint that wasn't a reflection, a shape that wasn't solid. I could feel its presence brushing against the edges of my mind. I forced my breathing slow, trying to ground myself in the reality of the task. The veteran's hand pressed briefly against my shoulder, steadying me. "Don't give it an inch," he whispered. "Even a glance can be enough." I nodded, swallowing hard. Suddenly, one of the newer divers froze mid-motion. His light flickered, and he glanced around as if sensing something behind him. My stomach dropped. The shimmer coiled closer, and I realized it wasn't just a glow anymore. It was intelligent, a presence. It pulsed in rhythm with the diver's breathing, anticipating, teasing. I gripped the cable tighter, forcing myself to continue, but my gaze betrayed me. A flicker of curiosity, just a split second, and I felt the tug in my chest. The ocean was patient, yes, but it was also hungry. The diver next to me whispered a question into his mic. "Did you see that?" The words barely formed before the shimmer surged, brighter and faster, darting around him like a snake. I wanted to warn him, to shout, to do something, anything, but my own voice caught in my throat. The rule repeated in my mind: never work after dark. The light above us hadn't gone out, but it might as well have. Darkness in these depths wasn't just absence, it was an invitation. I forced myself to complete the inspection, ignoring the pulsing shape. The cable needed the final adjustments, and hesitation could have catastrophic consequences. Each bolt I touched felt heavier, as if the shimmer's presence pressed against me, against the water itself. I couldn't allow my fear to overcome my duty. My mind raced, reminding me that one false move, one glance toward the glow, could mean the end. I focused entirely on the metal, the tools, the steady pulse of my own heartbeat, and then I felt it, something brushing my glove, light, cold, and almost liquid, a movement that shouldn't exist. My fingers froze around the tool, my mind screaming, but I forced myself to ignore it. The veteran caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. "Keep moving, don't touch, don't even look." That brief glance was enough to ground me, but it wasn't enough to stop the sense that something had shifted, that the shimmer was testing boundaries, feeling for weakness. We finished the task and began the ascent. The shimmer receded, slipping into the shadows as if satisfied. For now, my muscles were tense, my breath uneven, but I survived. Still, I knew the moment we breached the surface wouldn't erase it. Darkness had followed us before. It was patient, waiting, and somewhere below the pulse of light had not ended. Back on deck, the night sky pressed down over us, heavy and suffocating. I tried to tell myself we were safe, but every shadow on the ship, every distant wave, felt like a ripple from the deep. The veteran didn't speak much, only casting long glances toward the horizon, eyes full of warnings I couldn't yet understand. I stayed on my bunk that night, listening to the swell of the ocean, heartbeat sinking with the memory of the shimmer, knowing that darkness wasn't something we escaped. It followed. As I drifted toward a restless sleep, I thought about the rules again. Rule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They weren't suggestions, they were lifelines, and I had broken none so far, but I could feel the ocean testing me, seeing how far I could be pushed. One misstep, one glance, one touch, and it would claim me, just like the rookie, just like the others. Somewhere deep below, I felt the shimmer pulse one last time before night, swallowed the deck completely, and I knew it wasn't done waiting. The shimmer was gone, or at least I told myself it was. As I lay on the deck, the night pressing down over the ship like a weight, my mind refused to rest, replaying every pulse, every flicker from the previous dive. That's when I remembered the next rule. Rule 6. Never attempt to recover anything from the abyss alone. I had always thought this one was about safety protocols, about being tethered and having someone watch your back. Now I knew it wasn't just caution, it was survival. The abyss didn't forgive mistakes, and it never worked with rules you could bend. The next mission was simple on paper: retrieve a lost junction box tangled in the cable trench. The logs indicated it had slipped from its housing weeks ago, but the veteran insisted we take at least 2 divers down, and he paired me with a mid-tier diver named Lang. His eyes were cautious, and his movements slow, as if he already knew that darkness below didn't like newcomers. The hatch opened, and the black sea swallowed us immediately. My lamp barely cut through the gloom, the abyss waiting silently for the first sign of weakness. I focused on the cable, tracing it to where the box had been reported. The trench stretched endlessly, a canyon of mud and silt that swallowed our light. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting just beyond our vision. I remembered the rules: lights checked, knocking ignored, voices unanswered, glowing objects untouched, work only during the day. Now Rule 6 demanded I keep my partner close, that we trust no one outside our team, and that we never act alone. That meant I couldn't even think about grabbing the box first. It had to be us together. Minutes dragged. My breathing echoed in my helmet, mingling with the faint groans of metal and distant currents. The junction box sat at the bottom of a shallow pit, half buried in mud, faintly reflecting the light from our lamps. It shouldn't have been dangerous, but in this place, even ordinary metal could become a death sentence. I glanced at Lang, trying to communicate the hesitation I felt. He nodded, and we moved as one, tools ready, hands steady, hearts pounding in sync. As we reached the box, a faint glow flickered at the edges of our vision. I froze, the memory of the shimmer from Rule 4 flashing through my mind. It wasn't bright, not like before, but it pulsed, teasing, moving just beyond our lamps. My fingers itched to reach out, to grab the box and finish the job. But Rule 6 screamed in my mind: no one survives the abyss alone. If either of us made a mistake, if I had acted before Lang was in position, whatever this thing was would claim us immediately. I spoke softly into my radio, coordinating movements, my voice steady, despite the fear coiling in my gut. The shimmer moved again, slower this time, almost studying us. The abyss had a patience I couldn't comprehend. Every movement we made caused ripples, shadows that seemed to reach, probing the boundaries of our lamps. I felt sweat trickle down my back, mixing with the cold of the water, and every instinct screamed that we were being watched, tested. Lang's hand brushed mine as we lifted the box together. The shimmer flared suddenly, brighter than I expected, and the water around it shifted like smoke. I froze, tools in hand, and felt a tug on my thoughts, subtle but insistent. It wanted one of us to falter, to grab it alone. I held my breath, pressing against the cable to anchor myself, and Lang mirrored the motion exactly. Together we moved the box, ignoring the pulses of light, every second a test of discipline, of obedience. Suddenly, a current surged, swirling silt around the box and our legs. The shimmer wrapped around the edges of our light, coiling like it had done with the diver from Rule 4. Panic clawed at me, but I held fast. Together I whispered, not to the radio, but to Lang. His nod was faint, barely perceptible, but enough. We lifted the box slowly, carefully, our beams cutting through the murk as we ascended, never letting go of the connection between us. Halfway up, a sudden shadow darted beneath the box, faster than anything natural. I shouted in my helmet, adrenaline spiking, and the shimmer pulsed violently. Lang shouted too, and for a terrifying second, it felt like the abyss had reached into the bell, grasping for us. My hands shook on the box, but I kept them steady. The current fought against us, twisting ropes and tools, but the combined effort of both divers carried the box upward. By the time the hatch opened at the surface, my arms burned, my lungs screamed, and the veteran was already pulling us onto the deck. His eyes scanned the horizon, but he didn't speak immediately. I dropped the box beside him, trembling. "You did well," he said finally, voice low. "Alone, it would have taken one of you." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I understood anyway. The abyss tests everyone who dares touch what shouldn't be touched. and it doesn't care if you're skilled, smart, or prepared. That night, back in my cabin, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the shimmer in the box. Even on deck, under lights, I could feel its presence somewhere below, patient and waiting. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the ship, every distant wave, felt like a ripple of warning. The abyss didn't forget. It didn't forgive. I thought of the rules, 1 through 6, and how they weren't just guidelines. They were shields against something older, smarter, hungrier than any human imagination could conceive. Somewhere beneath the steel hull, in the deep silt of the trench, I could feel it pulsing again, faint but deliberate. It was patient, calculating, waiting for the next mistake, the first hint of disobedience, and I knew with a certainty that chilled my blood, if we returned down there after dark again, alone or curious, there would be no coming back. Even after the box was secured on deck, the memory of the shimmer lingered in every corner of my mind. Its pulse was still alive in my thoughts, a heartbeat beneath the hull. That's when I remembered Rule 7. Never ignore the sound of the ocean whispering. At first I thought it was figurative, a poetic way of warning divers to pay attention. But after everything, the knocks, the voices, the glow, I understood the truth. The ocean whispers, and when it does, it isn't offering guidance. It's testing your attention, reading your fear, and learning how to break you. The next morning, as we prepared for a maintenance dive, the water was calm on the surface, but I couldn't shake the tension crawling through my veins. The veteran handed me my tools silently, eyes fixed on the horizon, lips pressed tight. Even the deck crew seemed quieter than usual, as if they sensed the current of danger rippling beneath the waves. My mind flickered to the whispers I'd heard in the headset during Rule 3, the sibilant draw of a voice using my name. Could the whispers of the ocean be the same thing, but louder, broader, and far more patient? Descending into the trench, I could feel it immediately. The difference. The water was heavier, oppressive, carrying a low hum beneath the sound of the winch. I tried to focus on the cable, on the familiar metal under my gloves, but the hum grew. It shifted, undulating, brushing against the inside of my helmet like a presence that knew me intimately. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as currents, machinery, or my imagination, but I couldn't. The whispers were real, and they were directed at me. I glanced at Lane, my partner again, but he seemed unaware. He traced the cable methodically, glancing up only to check the light. That was when it became clear. The whispers weren't meant for everyone. They were personal, intimate, targeting you alone. "It's just the water," I muttered under my breath, forcing my voice into the radio to ground myself. Yet the hum responded, shifting into syllables almost recognizable, almost calling my name without quite forming it. My stomach tightened. Rule 7 wasn't a suggestion. It was life or death. The cable we were inspecting passed through a narrow crevice in the trench, silt rising with every movement. As I worked, the hum intensified, layering into multiple tones, overlapping like voices arguing underwater. The shimmer from Rule 4 and 6 flickered faintly near the crevice, a subtle reminder that the ocean was not neutral. It had memory, it had patience, and now through sound it was probing me, trying to find a weakness in my focus, an itch of curiosity I might scratch. I tried to immerse myself in the task, checking bolts, smoothing connections, ensuring no microfractures remained. But the whispers evolved, shaping themselves into familiar tones. My mother, the veteran, even my own voice, fractured, warped, and repeated back at me in the hum. I clenched my jaw to stop myself from replying, a mental reminder flashing. Never ignore the sound of the ocean whispering. To respond, even mentally, was an invitation. To react was to surrender. Lane froze mid-step suddenly, and my heart stopped. His light wavered, and his hand trembled, as if he'd heard the whispers too. I wanted to warn him, but my own panic kept me rooted. The sound of the ocean shifted, pulsing stronger, forming phrases that weren't words but intention. I felt it reaching into my thoughts, pressing against memories, probing for emotion, for fear, for curiosity. The abyss was alive, and the whispers were its veins, carrying malice, patience, and inevitability. Minutes, or was it hours, passed with every pulse of sound making me grit my teeth. I tried counting breaths, focusing on pressure gauges, repeating every rule in my head like a mantra. But the whispers adapted, bending around my focus, punctuating my awareness with flickers of light from the shimmer, teasing, drawing attention, testing discipline. The veteran's voice finally crackled through the radio, sharp and urgent. Ignore it. Eyes on the cable. Every sound is a test. As we approached the end of the section, a current swept the silt into a swirling cloud, obscuring our lights. The whispers intensified into overlapping voices, layering over each other like a choir underwater. My heart hammered. I felt pressure on my shoulders, not physical, but mental, as if the water itself had weight. I realized then that ignoring it wasn't enough. You had to pretend not to notice. You had to treat the whispers as nothing at all, even as they wrapped themselves around your mind like tentacles. Suddenly, Lang's helmet light flickered, and I could just barely see the shimmer hovering near the cable, reacting to the intensity of the whispers. Its pulse seemed in sync with the layered voices, flickering faster with each wave of sound. I gritted my teeth, forcing my breathing steady, reminding myself of every previous rule. Rule 1 through 6. Focus on the cable. Ignore the sounds. Ignore the light. Never act alone. Never answer voices. My hands ached from holding tools so tightly, but I dared not loosen my grip. By the time we reached the surface, gasping for air, my mind was raw. The whispers receded, but left a residue in my thoughts, a subtle tickle that threatened to make me speak when I should remain silent. I collapsed onto the deck, staring at the waves, the shimmer of the ocean faintly reflecting moonlight. The veteran approached, his eyes narrowed. "It knows you're listening," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The ocean remembers, and it whispers. Never ignore it." That night, as the ship rocked gently, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of ropes, every wave hitting the hull, sounded like whispers, echoes of the abyss reaching through the water and the deck. I understood, more than ever, that the ocean wasn't passive. It was alive, aware, patient and intelligent, and it was testing me, just as it had tested the others. Somewhere deep below, I knew. The shimmer pulsed faintly again, synchronized with the whispers, waiting for the next mistake, waiting for me to forget. Even after surfacing, the memory of the whispers and the shimmer clung to me, a weight pressing against my chest. That's when I remembered Rule 8. Never dive into a shadow you can't see the bottom of. I had thought this was about murky water or tight caves, but now I knew it was something more insidious. Shadows in the deep weren't just darkness. They were invitations, traps, and doorways for whatever lurked below, waiting for curiosity or fear to pull a diver into their grip. Our next task was to inspect a section of cable that passed through a natural crevice, a trench that dropped into complete blackness. The veteran warned us repeatedly, "Keep your lights on, stay in sight of each other, never step into a shadow you can't see the bottom of." I nodded though. Every instinct screamed that the abyss didn't need my acknowledgement. It already knew I would hesitate, that I would glance toward the black, that I would weigh the risk against my curiosity. Descending, the water immediately swallowed us. The trench dropped steeply, and I could feel the pressure of unseen walls pressing in, not physically, but mentally. My lamp barely illuminated the edges, leaving great swathes of black beyond our reach. Lang stayed close, his light steady. I tried to focus on the cable, the bolts, the metal beneath my gloves, but the pulse of the shimmer and the whispers from Rule 7 lingered at the edge of my mind. It was testing me again. We reached the edge of the trench, where the cable disappeared into a shadow so black it seemed to swallow our lights. My pulse quickened, and my gloved fingers tightened on the tools. I wanted to retreat, to pull back to safety, but the task demanded that we inspect it. I reminded myself, Rule 8 exists for a reason. One wrong step, one glance into the shadow, and you wouldn't just get lost, you'd be claimed. And somehow I knew this shadow had patience, waiting for hesitation, for fear, for weakness. Lang shone his light down briefly, just to gauge the depth, and I could see the trench drop straight into black infinity. There was no floor visible, only the faint outlines of sediment drifting downward. My mind screamed to pull back, to abandon the dive, but we needed to complete the inspection. Slowly, methodically, we began moving along the edge, checking tension in the cable, mapping the path where it vanished into the abyss. Every movement was careful, deliberate, because even a minor slip could be fatal. A faint glimmer caught my peripheral vision. I froze. It was subtle, almost like reflected light on silt, but my stomach tightened. The shimmer from Rule 4, 6, and 7 flickered faintly nearby, hovering just outside the edge of the shadow. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes back to the cable. I could feel the pull, a magnetic tug at my attention. It wasn't trying to harm yet, it was waiting for a mistake. A single glance, a single step into the black, and it would strike. I kept my movements slow, tracing the cable with my hands. The pressure in the water seemed heavier here, more oppressive. Every crevice, every angle, was a potential trap. I could feel the whispers returning faintly, brushing against the edges of my helmet like smoke. Not words this time, just sensation. A gentle tug, a subtle pull at my thoughts. I forced myself to stay focused, reminding myself that Rule 8 wasn't about fear, it was about survival. One misstep here and there would be no second chance. Lang reached the junction first, signaling that the bolts were secure. I approached cautiously, every motion measured. That's when I noticed a faint movement in the blackness. Something large, serpentine, but blurred and distant. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The shadow seemed alive, coiling and twisting in the water, like it was waiting for me to step forward. My hands tightened around the cable, my heart thundering, and I remembered every warning the veteran had given about the abyss. Suddenly, the shadow pulsed, expanding slightly, as though reacting to our presence. The shimmer flickered closer, almost brushing our lights, and I realized the abyss was not just dark, it was aware. It knew we were there, testing patience, observing reactions, and the longer we lingered, the closer it came to deciding who would be claimed. I forced myself to focus solely on the cable, on the bolts, on the path we had to follow, ignoring every instinct to look into the black. Minutes dragged, the shadow's movements subtle but unrelenting. Lang glanced at me, eyes wide with unease. But we didn't speak, not a word. Every sound echoed strangely, every vibration in the water magnified. The shimmer flickered once more, then disappeared, leaving the black abyss below as silent and patient as before. It wasn't gone, it was waiting, and I knew that the next time we returned, even the slightest curiosity could mean the end. By the time we reached the surface, my arms and legs were trembling. The veteran hauled us aboard, silently, scanning the horizon. He didn't speak immediately, only watching the dark water as if it could strike again at any moment. I collapsed in the cabin later, staring at the ceiling, thinking of shadows, whispers, and shimmer, realizing that Rule 8 wasn't just a guideline, it was a boundary. Crossing it was not about bravery, it was about survival, and no human curiosity could compete with the patience of the abyss. Somewhere in the depths, I knew, the shadow waited still, coiled like a predator, synchronized with the whispers, synchronized with the shimmer, and I knew that eventually, it would test me again. The shadow lingered in my mind even as we surfaced, a silent weight pressing at the edges of my consciousness. But the shimmer, faint yet persistent, wasn't gone. It waited below, patient and deliberate. That's when I recalled Rule 9. Never follow strange lights alone. At first it seemed straightforward, almost common sense, but after months of dives, I understood it differently. Strange lights weren't beacons. They were traps, invitations sent by the deep to lure the curious, the greedy, the reckless. Alone, you had no defense. Alone, you became prey. The next mission was urgent. A navigational buoy had reported a break in the cable far deeper than before. Only one diver was to descend with specialized tools. while a second monitored from the bell. My stomach tightened. It was daytime, the sun filtering weakly through the waves. But the deeper we went, the faster daylight disappeared. The abyss swallowed the light, and even my helmet lamp cut only a narrow tunnel through the thick black. I reminded myself constantly, Rule 9 existed for a reason. Alone, I was vulnerable. Lang stayed behind in the bell as I descended, tethered by a communication cable and lifeline. The glow from Rule 4 flickered in the periphery, teasing the edges of my vision, but I didn't acknowledge it. My hands gripped the cable tools tightly. My heartbeat synced to the slow pulses of the shimmer below. I reminded myself repeatedly that even a glance toward it could be dangerous. The ocean didn't forgive mistakes. The shimmer had tested me before, and it was patient enough to wait until I acted alone. The cable ran along a narrow trench, and faint lights, not from my lamp, began to glimmer further ahead. They weren't bright, not like the shimmer, but enough to make me pause. My instincts screamed to follow them, to investigate, but the rule echoed in my mind. The ocean whispers from Rule 7 seemed to return in soft, curling waves, brushing against my thoughts. I forced my gaze back to the cable, my tools, my breath, knowing that every step toward the lights without a partner would invite disaster. I progressed slowly, deliberately, avoiding the pull of the strange illumination. Yet every time my beam passed near the glow, it flickered and pulsed, almost as if it were taunting me. My mind fought curiosity, the urge to investigate, the desire to see what lay ahead, but the memory of the rookie, the shimmer, the abyss's patience, all reminded me that Rule 9 wasn't a suggestion. Alone, even a cautious move could end everything. The trench narrowed, silt rising with every movement. The lights ahead flickered in rhythm, tempting me to move faster, to see what waited. My hands shook slightly around the tools, my heart pounding in my chest. I spoke softly into my headset, letting Lang know my progress. The shimmer pulsed again, dancing at the edge of my vision. I could almost hear it calling, a faint, mocking rhythm that synchronized with my pulse. I swallowed hard and reminded myself to continue alone, but cautiously, tethered, never moving beyond the reach of safety. The lights flickered closer. I realized then that this wasn't just about curiosity. It was about control. The shimmer and the lights weren't random. They responded to hesitation, to attention, to fear. They measured me, probing for weakness, testing obedience. One misstep, one glance, one movement toward the lights without caution, and I would vanish like the others. My hands tightened on the tools, my eyes locked forward, ignoring the pulsating glow at all costs. Suddenly, a small object detached from the cable and drifted near the lights. It wasn't mine. My pulse spiked as I remembered Rule 6. Never attempt recovery alone. I froze, gripping the cable to anchor myself. The object twirled in the water, moving toward the shimmer, and I realized it was a test. If I reached for it, I would be breaking two rules at once. I forced my attention back to the cable, steadying my breathing, ignoring the pull, ignoring the light, ignoring the temptation to follow. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, passed with the lights flickering, but never reaching toward me. The abyss remained silent, patient, watching, waiting for a misstep. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every pulse of the shimmer seemed calculated, deliberate, testing discipline. I gripped the tools tighter, forced my gaze forward, and moved with purpose, never straying, never following the lights alone. The ocean whispered faintly around me, a soft, sibilant warning that promised consequences for the curious. Finally, the broken section of cable came into view. I worked quickly, methodically, repairing the damage without looking at the strange lights. The shimmer pulsed at the edges of my vision, but stayed at a distance, as if satisfied with my obedience. For now, every movement, every adjustment, was slow and precise. I reminded myself that this was why the rules existed. The abyss was patient, but not forgiving, and the smallest lapse in judgment could be fatal. By the time I ascended, The strange lights had vanished, leaving only the faint shimmer flickering in the distance. Lang hauled me back aboard silently, eyes scanning the horizon. I collapsed on the deck, exhausted, heart pounding, and realized that the ocean didn't just punish curiosity, it studied it, learning how far a diver could be tested, how long obedience could hold. Later, in my cabin, I replayed the dive, endlessly. The shimmer, the whispers, the lights, they weren't random, they were deliberate. They waited, watching, calculating, always testing. I understood now more than ever why the rules existed, why each one mattered. Rule 9 wasn't about fear, it was about survival. And somewhere below, in the black, the shimmer pulsed again, synchronized with the lights and the whispers, waiting for the next mistake. The shimmer pulsed faintly beneath the waves, even after we resurfaced, a patient reminder that the abyss never forgets. The lights from Rule 9 had vanished, but their presence lingered in my mind, and the whispers followed me, soft and insistent. That's when I recalled Rule 10, never attempt to communicate with the unknown. At first it seemed like a guideline for explorers, for those tempted to speak to the ocean's anomalies. Now, I understood the true meaning. Any attempt to reach out, to understand, to interact, it wasn't just dangerous, it was an invitation to vanish. Our next dive was meant to inspect a damaged splice near a ridge where currents converged violently. I descended first, Lang at my side, tethered by the usual lifeline. The water around us was unnervingly still, as if holding its breath. Every instinct screamed caution. Every shadow pressed closer than it should. The shimmer flickered at the edge of my light, and faint pulses echoed the rhythm of the ocean itself. My gloved fingers tightened around the tools. This wasn't about repair anymore, it was about obedience. As we moved along the ridge, the whispers returned, more deliberate this time. They didn't speak words, not exactly, but formed shapes and sounds in my mind. Faint, beckoning, testing. A shadow shifted in the current, forming a vague humanoid shape, only slightly visible in the dim light. I froze. I could feel the tug, the insistent pull to respond, to interact. My mind screamed to speak, to ask questions, to reach out, but Rule 10 repeated itself in my thoughts. No matter how tempting, no matter how curious, no words could be uttered. Lang glanced at me briefly, eyes wide, sensing my hesitation. I wanted to warn him, to shout into the radio, to connect, but my own instincts kept me silent. The shimmer pulsed stronger, reacting to our restraint, almost as if measuring our discipline. The shadow drifted closer, coiling with the currents, and I could feel its awareness brushing against my thoughts. Every pulse, every flicker, reminded me why communication was forbidden. To acknowledge its presence was to offer yourself as prey. I focused entirely on the cable splice, ignoring the movement at the edge of our lights. The shadow moved in rhythm, with the shimmer teasing, probing, aware that I noticed it but dared not interact. The whispers intensified, a soft chorus that scraped against the inside of my helmet. I gritted my teeth and forced my mind onto the task at hand. Check bolts, secure connectors, trace cable length. Every movement was careful, deliberate. One lapse, one moment of curiosity, could be fatal. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of our equipment. The shadow remained, pulsing slightly, waiting for any sign that I would speak or reach out. I could feel Lang tense beside me, mirroring my own caution. Even the current seemed aware, pressing slightly against my back, tugging at the tether, almost as if the ocean itself had a will. The shimmer danced at the edges of my vision, reinforcing the rule silently. Never communicate, never respond, never offer a bridge. A subtle motion caught my eye, a faint gesture, like a beckoning hand made of shadows, formed briefly in the currents. My mind wanted to ask, to understand, to respond. The whispering chorus in my helmet grew, almost urging me to reach out. I clenched my jaw, repeating the rule over and over, grounding myself in survival. The abyss doesn't reward curiosity. It doesn't negotiate. Any attempt to communicate, even silently, could be your end. The repair took longer than expected. Each adjustment careful, precise, every step weighed against potential dangers. The shadow lingered, pulsing in rhythm with the shimmer, ever patient. I focused on the cables, on laying on the tether, keeping me tethered to safety. Slowly, methodically, we finished the task, our lights barely cutting through the deep black. The whispers faded, leaving only the low pulse of the shimmer. It wasn't gone. It was still watching, waiting. Ascending to the bell, I could feel tension leaving my body in small increments. But the memory of the shadow, the shimmer, and the whispers stayed. The veteran hauled us aboard silently, scanning the horizon. He didn't need to ask what we experienced. The ocean's subtle presence always left marks. I understood now more clearly than ever. The unknown doesn't respond to words, to curiosity, to attempts at connection. It observes, it learns, and it waits. That night in my cabin, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the abyss, the shadow and the shimmer. Even on deck, even with lights and companions, the pulse below persisted, reminding me that Rule 10 wasn't a suggestion. Communication was a trap, patience was the predator, and the ocean had a memory older than anything human. Somewhere below, in the black, the shimmer pulsed again, synchronized with whispers, waiting for the next lapse in obedience. Even as we prepared to leave the trench, the shimmer pulsed faintly beneath us, a constant reminder of the abyss's patience. The whispers, subtle now, had become almost rhythmic, echoing through my thoughts. That's when I remembered Rule 11. Never surface until you've confirmed the abyss has let you go. I had assumed this rule applied only to depth or decompression safety, but now I understood its true purpose. The abyss doesn't release you willingly. You don't rise simply by moving upward. It decides when you may escape. We began our ascent slowly, tethered to the bell, every motion deliberate. Lang stayed close, eyes wide beneath the helmet, following my lead. The shimmer remained faint, just at the edge of our vision, pulsing like a heartbeat in the water. Currents tugged at the tether, light flickered, and shadows twisted unnaturally. I reminded myself that surfacing without ensuring the abyss had released its hold would be fatal. One wrong move and it could reach out, invisible but powerful, to claim us as it had claimed others before. The trench seemed endless, the blackness pressing from all sides, the glow from Rule 4, the pulses from Rule 6, the whispers from Rule 7. They all felt like rehearsed warnings converging. My hands gripped the cable, knuckles white, guiding us steadily upward. The ocean seemed to resist, as if pulling against our ascent, testing our adherence to every previous rule. I whispered reminders to myself. Light steady, tether intact, eyes on cable, ignore whispers, never alone, never communicate. Lang shivered slightly, and I could feel the tension in his body. The shimmer flickered closer, but it didn't attack. It tested. I understood then that the abyss wanted confirmation, wanted acknowledgement, that we respected the rules, that we didn't rush, that we didn't act rashly. Every pulse, every shift in shadow, every whisper was a question. Are you worthy to leave, or are you mine? I kept moving upward, deliberately slow, resisting every urge to glance behind or rush toward daylight. Currents swirled more aggressively as we approached shallower waters. The abyss seemed to follow, pressing against us, whispering faintly in rhythm with our heartbeat. My breathing remained controlled, deliberate, reminding myself of Rule 11. I couldn't surface until I was sure, until I could sense that whatever waited below had released its grip. Anything else would be foolish, and foolishness was punished here. Suddenly, a flicker of movement beneath us caught my eye, a shadow, low and coiling, moving in a slow, deliberate spiral. The shimmer danced around it, teasing, testing, drawing attention without threatening directly. My stomach tightened, and I clenched my jaw. I could feel the ocean itself holding its breath, waiting to see if I would panic, if I would accelerate. if I would break the rules that had kept me alive so far. I forced my gaze ahead, ignored the lure of the shadow, and moved upward steadily. Minutes felt like hours. Every layer of water above seemed heavier than the last, pressing down with expectation. The tether groaned faintly, reminding me that even mechanical connections could fail under tension. Lang's grip remained steady beside me, but I knew we were both aware that this ascent wasn't simple. The abyss tested patience, obedience, and focus. Surface too soon, and it might extend its reach. Too slow, and exhaustion could make mistakes inevitable. The first hint of sunlight filtered faintly through the water. I froze slightly, watching the shimmer pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Was it retreating, or was it merely waiting? I forced myself to take measured strokes, keeping hands on the tether, following Lang's movements, ensuring we adhered to every safety check. Surfacing was not liberation, it was negotiation. Confirmation was everything. Finally, the bell broke the surface, metal groaning softly as it was secured. My arms ached, my mind raced, but I didn't exhale fully. I scanned the horizon, checked the tether, and watched the shimmer's faint reflection recede deeper into the abyss. Only then did I allow myself a slow, deliberate breath. We had survived, for now. The abyss had released its hold, though temporarily, and the rules had been obeyed. Later, in my cabin, I stared at the water beyond the hull. The shimmer was gone, but its memory lingered, pulsing faintly in my thoughts. I thought of every rule, 1 through 11. Each one was a lifeline, a shield against something patient, intelligent, and infinitely patient. Even now, I could feel the abyss's presence, subtle but insistent, as if it were waiting for the next infraction, the next lapse in attention. I realized something chilling. The rules were not merely for survival. They were reminders that the ocean below was not inert, not passive, not safe. It watched, it tested, it remembers, and no matter how far you ascend, no matter how safely you surface, the abyss never forgets. The shimmer, the shadows, the whispers, they would wait, always, patient, eternal. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.